Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to my library tour for 2022. I'm making a visual record of all the books that I have in my possession in 2022, but also that I have in the book and volume of my memory, because I'm occasionally doing the Library of the Lost. That's what I'm doing this week. That's what I've done one other week when I was up in Vermont, trapped there by a record-breaking snowstorm in Massachusetts. And that is where I look back at the thousands of scanned book covers. I used to have a flatbed scanner. And every book that I got, I scanned. I miss that device still. I have it still. But it is such a primitive device that it will not draw power when plugged into a current MacBook. It's not compatible with them. And I keep meaning to substitute that by at least taking pictures with my phone. When I had that flatbed scanner, I didn't have a cell phone. At least taking pictures of every single thing that I get. I keep meaning to do that. I'm getting a little bit better at it as 2022 goes on because I cycle through books. So all the things that I'm going to show you now are from the Library of the Lost, and I don't have them anymore. Did it one time, physical copy, because I scanned these things, but don't anymore. And a lot of them I'm okay with not having anymore. Like, for instance, this first one. This is an old Harlequin Presents, number 2400. Harlequin Presents is still done. They're still made. Harlequin makes category romances, which are, they have several different categories: supernatural, Harlequin Presents, the plain old Harlequin romances, Harlequin historicals, that sort of thing. And they do typically 3 or 4 a month in all of those categories, and they have forever and ever. It's a huge publishing dynamo. A lot of authors get their start in categories. A lot of them love it so much, the editorial teams, the family atmosphere, that they'll keep writing category romances even after they're pulling in much more money for mainstream romances. And despite that, and despite the fact that these have been the gateway for so many people to love reading, category romances get disdained. Even by other romance readers, they get disdained. I here want to plug the Categorically Romance podcast done by Bree and Sarah. I've been on that podcast a couple of times. It's wonderful. They talk with category romance authors. They interview them. They talk about category romance issues, and it's delightful. Well needed in the genre. And this is a Harlequin romance from years and years and years ago by Sarah Craven, whose name I don't really know. So it's possible that this is the only book of hers I've ever read. It's called His Forbidden Bride, and there they are on the seashore. That would actually. What happened? Oh, you're asking me for iTunes. Does anybody use iTunes? I swear, this iPad, I love this little iPad, this little Richardson iPad. I love it for everything except that. Every minute it asks me to sign into iTunes. I'm not going to do that. You'd think that Apple technology is usually pretty responsive to what its users do or don't do. I've turned down that request probably 1,000,000 times. It still pops up. But this is His Forbidden Bride by Sarah Craven, where they're both laying on the beach. I think that's even some sort of starfish next to him. Trust me, those of you who have not had the poor judgment to try this, that is not comfortable. When you do that, I know you've seen it in 1,000,000 romance covers and in 1,000,000 movies, but it's not comfortable to do in any way. And it's almost never possible to do privately or anyway. Anyway, this is, if I remember correctly, it was, keep in mind, 15 years since I read it, but it was pretty good. Not in a repeatable way. I don't think I would ever reread it, but it was a neat story along familiar lines. She does not know his background. She does not know that he is a multimillionaire shipping magnate, despite his youth and his pecs and his hair and his eyelashes. She doesn't know that, and I guess it makes a difference. I don't quite remember the big MacGuffin at the ending, and that maybe speaks to the novel. I should remember. It hasn't been that long, and I am, after all, a 28-year-old. I don't have much furniture up there, so I should be able to remember it. Then this next one is a kid's book. I think I've talked about it on this channel before, maybe? Or maybe I wrote about it. I might have written about it 10, 15 years ago when I first encountered it. It's called Hurricane. I'm afraid I don't even have an author for it. I'm sure the author and illustrator are not the same person, but it's one of those wider paperback children's books about 2 kids experiencing a hurricane in their suburban house. What will it be like? What will be the warning signs? The hurricane isn't really severe by the time it reaches them. It can knock down tree branches and whatnot, but it's not going to level their home. And it was really good. It was one of those neat little children's book meditations on an ordinary thing, or in this case, well, hurricanes are still ordinary, but they are a little bit out of the ordinary. And I love children's books like this. I also like that I'm sure that the artist would say otherwise, but it's pretty clear. The kids are looking up with wonder and concern at the storm. It's pretty clear among the three living beings shown on this cover who's actually responsible for the storm and who's hoping that it gets really, really bad because they've had enough of these primates. I think that cover makes it pretty clear. but I might be biased. This next one was a big work of Renaissance history that I wish I still had. It must have been from an academic press. And I have no idea why I would get rid of it. This is by Lodi Nata, and it's called In Defense of Common Sense. There we have a lion getting a thorn pulled out of its paw, and that is an old story. And the thing that art historians will be most interested in here is the depiction of the books. But this, as you can see, this is Lorenzo Valla, the great Renaissance humanist, and the subtitle is Lorenzo Valla's Humanist Critique of Scholastic Philosophy. And those of you who let's make sure the bean is in the picture here. I was going to say those of you who are familiar with Lorenzo Valla, but that won't be any of you. But you might, if you were familiar with him and his relationship with medieval scholasticism, you would think, well, it's not a critique. It's scathing. He hates it. He attacks it. It's delightful to read. It's unfortunately, like so much of the really literary scraps done by the humanists, it's heavy on context. Valla is great to read, but you won't get it. You won't get what you're reading if you don't know something about the context. Same thing, I hate to say it, but the same thing is even true with, for instance, Erasmus's masterpiece, The Praise of Folly. You won't really get it if you don't know a little bit. But there's no reason why you can't know a little bit, right? You could easily learn a little bit, and then you'd know as much as you need to know. This was a study of Lorenzo Valla's attacks on, or critiques of, medieval scholasticism, and it at every turn tries to soften those and balance them by saying that they're not quite as acidic, they're not quite as unhinged as they seem. And at first, I remember resisting that idea. I thought, when somebody writes with, as Mark Twain put it, a pen dipped in hell, you want to let them do that. There's no. It's the nature of subsequent generations of scholars and literary critics to water things down, but that can be bad. That's often not accurate. But I loved the way the author wrote about this subject. Love the way the author wrote about Lorenzo Valla. I don't know why I don't still have this book. Big, relatively mainstream. You can't really write about the Italian humanists for a mainstream audience, but relatively accessible. It was, I don't remember exactly which one, but it was sort of major academic press. Those kinds of books about Lorenzo Valla that are meant to be read by just anybody are not common. You'd think I'd have kept it, especially since looking at it. I mean, I scanned this. I must have got it for review. You just take one look at this thing and know this. You're never going to see this in a used bookstore, ever. You'd think I would keep things like that, but apparently not. This next one is an old Signet paperback a mass market paperback that of an author that's gone now, and I never see her in used bookstores anymore. I used to see this whole run of Signet paperbacks. This is Margaret Campbell Barnes, and this is Isabelle the Fair. She was a historical novelist. This is a historical novel about the unfortunate woman who was conscripted, drafted, forced to be the wife of England's King Edward II. If you know anything about King Edward II, you will know that is a thankless task. To be his wife is a thankless task. There's a lot more to that than the thumbnail would lead you to believe. Edward II is really a king who's coming into his own. All of the latest biographies have been far, far better than 2, 3, 4, 5 generations of earlier biographies that mostly were content to regurgitate the propaganda made by Edward's enemies. Very much a case of, with Edward anyway, very much a case of the old humanist adage of ad fontes, go back to the sources. What do we actually know? The minute you do that, then the typical sympathizing characterizations of Isabel also go out the window, because she was what an earlier generation in this country referred to as a piece of work. But this is a terrific book. Actually, Margaret Campbell Barnes is a terrific historical novelist who just seems to have fallen through the cracks. She did a whole row of historical novels that are well worth your time. I don't know if they exist in the e-copies. I don't think anyone's printing her at the moment in paper. But I really liked this book. I had it as a little mass market paperback. You'd think it was such a small thing, you'd think I wouldn't have got rid of it. But I did. This next one is by Carrie Sperring. It's a fantasy novel, and I think this is a debut. Does it tell me anywhere on here? No. It says it's an original DAW mass market paperback, but I don't know if it's the author's debut. I think it was. This is a fantasy novel that I originally got just because I love this cover artist. A lot of you will remember this cover artist. This is called Living with Ghosts. And this is set in a fantasy world, a fantasy city called Merafi that is really, really well presented in this book. The world building here is really good, but also the city building, which not every fantasy writer gets right. I'm sure you've read plenty where they don't. This one does, and the world building was wonderful in this thing. I think this was the author's debut, where the whole world of Merafi is besieged by ghosts. Really, I mean, the title is Living with Ghosts, but really what's happening in this world is people fending off ghosts. This is a fantasy world that is completely surrounded by the malevolent dead, who want access to the living world. They're constantly trying to poke and peek in at any crack they can to get into the living world and terrorize it and command it and subsume it. And in this book, there is a MacGuffin that is threatening to make that happen. And there's a ragtag group, one might even say a fellowship, that comes together in order to try to stop that. And it's a good group. The author's really good at personalities, and inevitably one member of that fellowship is himself a ghost. I remember this being really, really good. Does for ghosts what Tolkien did for elves. And I don't know why I would get rid of it. This is an original DAW mass market paperback. I must have found it used. I don't think DAW would have sent me a paperback to review. I must have found this and didn't keep it for some reason or another. I remember liking it, so it isn't that I didn't like it. This next one I had a hardcover. If you go back to my earliest library tour, you might have seen this thing. I don't think I got rid of it until comparatively recently. This is by Stephen Mackenzie, and it is a biography of King David, which is biblical scholarship. That's all that it is, really, is biblical scholarship. I mean, you can supplement that with archaeological information about what may or may not be King David's time period. It's pretty obvious that King David is a mythical figure, that he didn't really exist. So you can extrapolate a little bit about archaeology and maybe come up with, a few details here and there. But really what you're going to be doing is piecing together a biography from the Old Testament. And you can do a good or a bad job with that. Rabbi David Wolpe does a fantastic job with that for the Jewish Lives series. His entry in the Jewish Lives series is King David. And it's tremendously good, tremendously enjoyable. And this was really enjoyable too. But inevitably, I wanted to preface it by saying, when you read a biography of King David or a novel of King David, you're going to be looking at people talking about scriptural analysis, right? They're not going to be looking at palace payment rolls or anything like that. This next one is a romance novel. I believe I bought it for the cover. This is Knights of the Round Table. There was a series, if I remember correctly. And this was volume, I think, 2. This is by Gwen Rowley, and this volume is Lancelot. Trust me when I tell you that a 5th century swordsman in a Britain that had just been cut loose from the Roman Empire and thrown onto the tender mercies of barbarian hordes, the swordsman wearing mail in that time period, encountering a young man who looked like that, well, let's just say the fallout of such an encounter would be like nothing that happens in this book. But I remember kind of enjoying this book, and I think I read one other book in the series. The point I'm trying to make is that no one in what we now refer to, generally speaking, as Arthurian Britain looked like that, except women. Men did not look like that and did not want to look like that. Fashions and sensibilities, aesthetics change over time, is what I'm saying. That's all. This is a romance series set around the familiar Howard Pyle idea of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. So when it comes to great Arthurian literature, the Arthurian starter kit that I keep meaning to make, this would not be on that list. But I seem to remember enjoying it fairly well. This wouldn't even be on the list if I made an Arthurian literature starter kit, as I certainly will. If I did that, there would have to be a romance novel or two on that list. There would have to be, just to cover the spread of Arthurian literature. But I could find better. I know better Arthurian romance novels than this. I just must have had it at one point and scanned it. Okay, this next one is Ancient Rome. Seems like in every one of these libraries of the lost, we go back to Ancient Rome just a bit. This is by Barry Hobson. And for this particular book on Ancient Rome, well, we don't know when we'll be reading it, but we have a pretty good idea of where we'll be reading it. This is Latrine et Foricae. Toilets in the Roman world. There on the cover is a toilet from the Roman world. And this was, believe it or not, really good. A lot of the Roman histories that I've shown in Libraries of the Lost, both here and in Vermont, have been really good volumes. That book on Vesuvius, a book on slave revolts in antiquity. I don't know why I didn't keep these things, is my point. When I know I'm not going to see them again, I know I'm not going to encounter them in used bookstores. So I don't know why I didn't keep them. I remember enjoying this quite a bit. It's heavily grounded on all of the primary sources that we can find for what Romans thought about pooping. If you're interested in a time period, you're going to be interested in that. You're going to be interested in all of it. What did they think of it? How did they do it? I mean, you know how they did it, but how did they do it? Did they excuse themselves from polite company? Did they joke about it? Did they have reading material? How did they clean up? How did they clean up? How do we know that? How do we know any of that? Did they, we know a lot and we could stand to know more. And this book was like a wonderful check-in on the scholarship. How much we know and what we can infer from what we know. I loved it. Even though it's kind of funny, I loved it. And don't know why I didn't keep it. I, of course, have never seen it since. I would never see this book anywhere, but I should have kept it. What else have we got here? Okay, here's another evolution book. We seem to encounter a lot of those as well. This one was terrific. This is Life Ascending, The 10 Great Inventions of Evolution by Nick Lane. It's a bright cover, so it might wash out on us there. Are you fixing to get down? Hi, baby. You're a great invention of evolution. Baby, how are you doing? I'm talking about books. What was I saying before I started smooching with my baby? Oh, hello, baby. Hello. Do you want to come down here? Huh? Hang on a second, everybody. While she likes to stretch, and I want to make sure she lands correctly because she spent last week not feeling very good. What are you going to do? Are you going to curl up next to me? You are. There you go. There you go. I should show you since it was all a whole bunch of drama. That's what it caused. She didn't want to be up there anymore. She wanted to be down here. That is the ambit, though. She doesn't like to be more than 4 feet away from me at any time. But anyway, we were talking about Life Ascending, which you can't really see because it's washed out because it's a bright color. But this is another great popular history book on evolution by means of natural selection. And what it means there, it's intentionally courting controversy by saying great inventions of evolution. Of course, evolution does not invent things, right? Evolution is a blind process. There is no plan. There is no planner. But evolution does life forms do encounter problems, or at least situations. And they often evolve similar or innovative approaches to those situations. And this book looks at 10 of those from the evolution of the eye over and over again. Some sort of eye has evolved, or striated muscles, or flight, or camouflage, things like that. Situations that evolution has come up with inventions for over and over again. And it's not long. It's really well done, really enjoyably written. I wanted it to be longer. Don't have a copy. Wish I did. And then we'll finish up with this last one, which is part of a series, the Living World of Nature series. I once had all of these things. And sooner or later, either at a used bookstore or more likely at a yard sale, I will encounter the whole set again, and I'll probably get them because they're really good. They really are. They were big hardcover illustrated nature books. There was one on evolution. There was one on the universe. There was one on mountains, early man, fossil man, that sort of thing. And this one is the life of the pond. And it's all about what a pond is, as opposed to a lake, as opposed to, the seashore. What is a pond like? What is it? How do you determine its biosphere? What lives there? How does it work? And I love that sort of thing. When it comes to tiny little niche biomes, I love ponds. I don't love them quite as much as salt marshes, but I love them. And I've spent a huge amount of time just hanging out at them, listening to them, poking around, seeing what lives in them. It can be a little bit dicey if you're doing that, far away from the beaten path, because bears like ponds. And I don't like bears. Nor does anybody sane like bears. It's not always a tricky thing to encounter a bear in the wild. It's technically speaking much more tricky to encounter a mountain lion in the wild. Because, as mentioned yesterday, the added element of malevolence. But the thing about encountering a mountain lion in the wild is that you never know you're doing it. You virtually never know they're there. That's the whole point. Whereas bears, 9 times out of 10, they're going to turn and run if they see you. They're not going to want to encounter you any more than you encounter them. But if they don't do that, is what I'm trying to say. If they don't do that, the encounter will go really, really bad. But why did we end up talking about bears? We're talking about the pond. Ponds are usually characterized by frogs, turtles, birds of all kinds, insects. Wonderful thing to sit and explore. I've had many local ponds in various places where I have lived, where I have just gone and spent a huge amount of time. And this book is all about the natural history of those places. I wish I still had this. I don't know why I would ever get rid of it, unless maybe it fell apart. That's the one explanation I can come up with. I had a copy of Fossil Man, a kind of volume in one of these series, that I used until it literally fell apart. So it could be that this fell apart. I don't actually have a memory of it. But that is our Library of the Lost for today, complete with Frida footage. And I'm going to wrap this up, and we will continue with our library tour tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.